It's really interesting seeing fanboys, PlayStation fanboys, always coming out and trying to pretend that the PS2 is one of the best consoles ever made. And I do say pretend because it's so interesting when you compare and contrast how Nintendo fans treat something like, say, the Super Nintendo compared to how Sony fans treat the PS2. It's so interesting seeing how Super Nintendo fans will talk about all these different games, these RPGs, these platformers, these shooters, these fighting games, everything that and Super Nintendo fans played over the years. There's all these hidden gems. There are all these like different communities. There are all these different arguments. There are like debates, discussions, and above all, games. Like, people will talk about the games. It's so interesting whenever I boot up a Super Nintendo stream, play some Yoshi's Island, play some, like, Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Kirby's Dream Land 3. I do generally get an audience of people who know the game and know what I'm playing and have played it themselves and understand that it's a great video game. But PS2, the poor PS2. When you get right down to it, the only thing that anyone talks about when it comes to the PS2, when it comes to online discussions, is how much it sold, allegedly. PS2 is the best-selling console ever made, so that makes it the best. There's no regard at all for, like, the games, the library, the features, what the console could actually do, the developers that were working on it, it's the memories you have with that console. It all just feels rather flat and just hollow for the most part. There are a handful of cult classic games on PS2 like God Hand, Kingdom Hearts, Silent Hill 2. There are a handful of games, right, that people really like on PS2, but that's it. Like, just a small handful, right? Like, just a small tiny fraction of what the GameCube and the Xbox were getting around that same time, right? Like, the games that people actually remember, Ninja Gaiden Black, Knights of the Old Republic, Luigi's Mansion, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Super Mario Sunshine, Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, Metroid Prime. The list goes on and on. Like, the games that people actually remember are not on PS2. Like, other than a scant few games that appeal to a non-gaming demographic, GTA and sports games, the same as it is today. The PS2 didn't really have anything to go for it. Like, it really did feel at that time the main reason that people weren't playing on Nintendo was that it wasn't cool to do so. And I think that's all it really boils down to, in that, like, most people will just want to play a game sometimes, and they'll buy a Mortal Kombat or something, and PS2 has that, so I guess we're getting a PS2. There's no real thought behind that decision, and there's no real enthusiasm behind it. It's kind of interesting how I and everyone else I know who owns a PS2 doesn't really care for or remember it all that much, and yet somehow Super Nintendo classics are everywhere. N64s are everywhere. Wii's are everywhere. GameCubes. I've had several girlfriends over the past couple of years who love GameCube. It just goes. It's incredible. It really does feel like the Nintendo fan base is filled with all these different people who played all these different consoles, all these different games, all these different franchises across different time periods of their lives, and yet the PlayStation fanboys, just stick with PlayStation because that's what's popular. They're the I don't even know how to describe it. They are essentially trying to be the cool kids on the block. I don't know how else to describe it. They are essentially chasing clout. Like, right? When you get down to it, they're not really standing up for they're not really enjoying their favorite games. They're not really like looking into what they're interested in or following their goals or ambitions. They want to be cool. They want to be acknowledged. They want to fit in and do what's going to make them popular. And I do think that's the reason why these PlayStation fanboys will brag about sales so much when no Nintendo fan seriously brags about Wii or DS sales unless it's a direct response to this kind of thing. Because when you get right down to it, real gamers play games and not sales, right? I do think this is why the online gaming community is becoming such a shithole. Is because it's a bunch of nerds going online and like talking business, talking technology, talking about talking about like financials, talking about all this stuff that they don't have the slightest clue about in order to defend their beloved PlayStation. That's the PlayStation community, and they'll always stand by whatever PlayStation decides to do. It's so interesting how they'll fight tooth and nail to keep exclusives. But like the instant they go to PC, they'll pretend that we never played that anyway. We never liked that anyway. Just look at what happened with Horizon Zero Dawn, where they tried to disassociate themselves with that brand once it became multiplat, once it was no longer cool to support that brand. So, I'm definitely curious as to how much longer this PS2 narrative is going to continue, because in my eyes it's already kind of died, because like no one continues to play their PS2 today. No one does. Like pretty much everything has been re-released on modern consoles, everything relevant, and including Nintendo consoles in a lot of cases, and there's nothing interesting enough about the PS2 to like, bring it out of storage and whirl it up again. Like, why would I ever want to? Like, when you get right down to it, like, I didn't like it back when it was new. Like, I did own a PS2 growing up. It was a very distinctly untouched console compared to everything else. Like, there were things I liked on it, but like as I grew older, especially today, I began to realize that there is no reason at all for any of this to not be on Nintendo consoles. So that sort of started my whole crusade against PlayStation, is that like this mediocre gaming platform. I don't want to call it outright bad, but mediocre, not the best ever, right? That's the important bit here. This mediocre gaming platform gets all this praise and attention despite not really being innovative or interesting. Like Xbox had better online play. You know what I mean? Like it had better visuals. GameCube had like great multiplayer games, like just great Nintendo properties, great Nintendo games. The best single player games of that era, I would say. In between Nintendo and Xbox, like why would you ever want a PlayStation? Like, when you get right down to it, there's no real appeal. There's nothing there. I would just much rather just play these other platforms. That's what I feel, is that like PlayStation couldn't really compete back then. It only did so because of PlayStation's toxic control over the industry, over like their manipulation of certain demographics, ignorant demographics, and constantly slandering the competition. It is Sony that's responsible for all this anti-Nintendo propaganda that's going around the industry. Like Colin Moriarty, that does not happen. A person like that does not just happen. You know what I mean? Like, that is a person that's being built up by a corporation to defend them in a specific way. It's just no. It's unbelievable how people like that will like stand by the Vita of all things, a console with literally no games, while desperately trying to attack the Switch. We've seen this happen several times. I've seen it happen. I myself have seen a number of people make the assertion that PlayStation Vita is better than Nintendo Switch because, like, oh, it has the LOED screen. It's you can easily hack it and all this ridiculous stuff. I think that's ridiculous. I think it needs to be addressed that that Sony is way out of line. They can't really compete. The only reason you would ever think that PlayStation games are better than Nintendo ones is that you simply never played Nintendo games. That's the reality of this, and I think I do think that as more games like Breath of the Wild come out, we're going to see more and more people start to transition back to Nintendo. We are reaching the point where they can release dozens of games a year, right? Like dozens of games, and that's been happening several times. That's happened several times over the past couple of years, and you can't write off stuff like the Super Nintendo Online or the Switch Store or just the major physical releases, ignoring games like Astral Chains, ARMS, Octopath, Breath of the Wild, like Metroid Prime 4. Like, you can't ignore these games forever. You are making yourself look like a dipshit if you say shit like, oh, all I like are strategy games, and then you never play Mario Rabbids, you never play Fire Emblem, you never play Valkyria Chronicles, which is on Switch. You never try all these great games that are available on Switch and constantly make excuses not to. It's becoming increasingly transparent, I think, that the narrative that Nintendo doesn't have any games, or that they can't compete, or that PlayStation was at any point better than them, can't really hold up to any scrutiny. And with the Final Fantasy VII Remake such a big disaster, I hope this becomes more common knowledge. It needs to be known more that at the end of the day, Sony never had a chance.